And good afternoon. My name is Ryan Belmore, and I'm the owner and publisher of WhatsUpNewp. And we are keeping the conversation going with gubernatorial candidates just less than a year away now. He was the first Democrat to announce, or first candidate to announce that he'd be running for governor in 2022. And he is Dr. Daniel Muñoz. How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
Good. And it's great to see you. And we are without Frank today, but we will get through this and we're going to spend some time getting to know you.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Of course. Let's start at the basics. People might not know who you are, where you're from. Give us the basics about you.
Yeah, thank you so much. So again, Dr. Daniel Muñoz grew up in Central Falls, went through the school system, found my way, a bit later at the end of high school, but ultimately decided to go to college, went to Rhode Island College, studied philosophy. And after rocking a ponytail and doing a lot of deep thinking for a couple of years, I came to the realization that all of the things I had observed as a child led me to want to address suffering. And medicine was a great vehicle to do that. So I went on to focus on pre-med and then was able to enter into medical school at the University of Connecticut School of Medicine. During that migration, ended up in Pawtucket, and so resided in Pawtucket right up to at the later part of college, right up to grad school. And during grad school, while learning about medicine, clinical medicine, that is, just really came to the understanding that if we wanted to address the systemic inequities, it had to be more than just practicing medicine. There had to, industry could be a vehicle for bigger impact. And so that's a real abridged way of saying that I ultimately decided not to pursue a board certification and took the clinical experience I did have with the technology experience I had gained with research and then jumped into industry. And it was in industry that I ultimately got to the greatest of all the inflection points, which was the realization that healthcare is a for-profit industry that tends to not look for the most cost-effective solutions. And that model or example was really reflected in many other institutions across education and how we support or don't local economies. And it was in 2016 that I had that moment, and I realized that if we wanted to catalyze systemic change, it had to be through elected office. And the question then became, which elected office has the breadth of kind of coverage when it comes to these large systems? And the governor of Rhode Island has a significant role.
And we'll spend some time in Central Falls myself, lived in Central Falls as a young child. And I am thankful for the opportunity, small community, but, to live there and to know Central Falls. It is a great community, and enough can't be said good about it.
Yeah, the Square Mile City has that small town feel, right?
Not your first time around. You said you chose the governor's race because you could have the greatest impact. Why do you think that seat has the greatest impact for what you want to accomplish and the change you want to see?
Yeah, it's when we think about the various offices, from state offices to legislative offices to municipal offices, each of them are important. Each of them can play a vital role in transforming, these systems and affecting progress and programmatic change. The governor's office in the state of Rhode Island can serve as a catalyst. It's less of wanting to be the change agent that sees a policy through, 15, 20 years in a state that doesn't have term limits, and more about trying to make sure that, for instance, the American Rescue Plan Act funds that are a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity are allocated in a way that help us build our healthcare infrastructure, help us not only build education infrastructure, but really transform our education funding formula so that our cities and towns aren't segregated by affluence. And also, it's time to finally support local economies, the 30,000+ small businesses with less than 10 employees that every 4 years are promised, resources and never receive them. So this is a unique opportunity that was not really present when I first ran in 2018. But now more than ever, a governor can catalyze that change.
And I'm going to give a shout out for your website because I think it's one of the best I've seen so far. I'm going to run it along the bottom here. If people want to find out more, there's a ton of information on that website about what you stand for, endorsements, your latest news. But when it comes down to it, you're in a very crowded field. And, I'm going to ask each candidate this. People are going to go next summer, fall, and have to narrow these Democrats down. What is it that you hope is tied to your name that you want people to remember? If they can remember just an elevator speech, if they can just remember why they should give their vote to you.
Yeah, thank you. A homegrown physician outsider with the courage to push back against special interests and to work for working families in marginalized communities.
Excellent. That was an actual elevator speech. Sometimes I ask that question and it goes on for like 10 minutes and I wonder what building we're going up in. Yeah. There's a lot about what you stand for. Talk to us about some of the things that you're passionate about and that you have up on your website.
Yeah, thank you. So everything, my passions grow from observation. When I say, and my values grow from observation, and the observations I made as a child and as a young adult were very much, that people that were experiencing economic hardship consistently had access issues, because when infrastructure was designed, it wasn't designed in a way that was necessarily accessible. When people suffered from addiction, oftentimes that addiction actually stemmed from a healthcare system that was not properly weaning people off, right, of medications when they would leave the hospital. And one of my family members had a personal experience with that. And being a physician now and having gone through industry and seeing how these systems are perpetuated in many respects because they're advantageous to profit seekers, to large companies, to these special interests that we talk about. It just really informed the fire that I have in my heart to push back. And so what does that mean for healthcare? We have a state that during this pandemic, Blue Cross and Blue Shield is seeking to charge people for COVID-19 treatment. Blue Cross and Blue Shield is increasing co-payments for telemedicine when more than ever people need telemedicine and some mental health resources that may come in through that vehicle. And so how do we change our healthcare system? A lot of people, when they talk about progressive policy, always jump to, well, let's just control the payment system. Let's become the insurer. I would say that even if we do that, and it doesn't guarantee access. Since the 90s, our public health system throughout this country has been stripped of resources. And when public health is stripped of resources, community health centers deteriorate. And so now we found ourselves in the middle of a pandemic, and we didn't have even basic clinics to do enough testing. We had a governor, Gina Raimondo, and now Governor Dan McKee, who continues to privatize our public health system. So again, private health care is not really focused on community health care. So I'm of the belief that we need to use the American Rescue Plan Act funds to build out legitimate community health infrastructure to serve communities that are in need of addiction services, that are in need of mental health services, to ensure that we have proper preventive care for all of the chronic diseases that people have, whether it's high blood pressure or diabetes. And by doing that, we also provide sustainable infrastructure to deal with COVID-19, which isn't going anywhere. That is the first phase of what I call like a 10-year process here of transforming our healthcare system into one that is free. And that, when I talk about free, let me qualify it, that is free from with respects to the services that are being delivered and to the taxpayer, but certainly a system that does require that we really consider how we build those revenues out. And there are creative ways of doing that. But that's the second phase. In addition to that, really long answer about healthcare, which I'm passionate about. Look, I love Andrew Yang's idea of a universal basic income, where I feel like we should really kind of be taking some of that and applying it to a more targeted need we have in Rhode Island, is the need to support minimum wage earners, because it is getting far too expensive to live here. And so I would like to see Commerce Rhode Island transformed in a way where it's redirected to micro businesses, those 30,000+ businesses with 10 employees or less, then create a supplemental wage program. And so what that looks like is the minimum wage earners in those businesses will, if they enter into this program, they would have to agree, and the employer, they would essentially receive supplemental hourly wages. And in order to receive that, they would also attend Rhode Island Promises program. So we would actually open Rhode Island Promise up to people that can only attend for part-time, which currently isn't the case. Now, simultaneous to creating a pipeline out of poverty, we're supporting that business too. The overhead decreases in terms of operational costs, and that business can then, I believe, have employees that are focused only on that business rather than having 2 to 3 jobs. and also, as a result, possibly improve the quality of their services. If we were to team this program with free community healthcare as a first step to, having an entire single payer system in Rhode Island, that is a true pipeline out of opportunity. Because if you have two jobs in this state and each job pays you $15 an hour, you lose certain benefits. And so healthcare costs push you back down into a state of poverty. So if we can address that significant burden of healthcare costs, we can actually open the doors wide in the state to opportunity.
Let me try to act like a critic, be a critic. They're going to say, who's going to pay for it? Can't be done, too expensive. What do you say? What is your normally rebuttal if you're coming across those people?
Yeah, it's sustainability, is something that can always be, it can fit the narrative depending on the context of time, right? So if someone's saying, well, in a year, how will we pay for this? I would say, well, in a year, we have the federal dollars. If they said, well, in 5 years, how could we pay for this? Well, my argument would be that we really have to talk about the impact of bridging Commerce's program of a supplemental minimum wage program with Rhode Island Promise. I can get into a debate with an economist as to, whether skills as a qualifier is the appropriate term to use in an age where we know that many people can do jobs that they're not allowed to do because they don't have like a degree, but they have the skill. But if we have to play within that arena of skills, then we can address that barrier through Rhode Island Promise and essentially create a talent pool in Rhode Island that's not trying to fit into a large corporation that received a tax incentive and has a duty to hire 10 people, but rather create a talent base that attracts industry. And a country like Israel showed that to be the case when they developed an after-school program that essentially allowed students during high school to develop skill sets in cybersecurity. And by the time those students ended up in college, there was this massive talent pool of cybersecurity intermediate level, right, professionals. And that, in fact, attracted Microsoft, Intel, and all of these private companies to invest into infrastructure around that talent. So if someone said, what does this look like 5 years from now? And how do we make it sustainable? Well, the tax base that we're going to attract by getting large corporations here to meet that talent pool that we're going to create is a way to do it. And then it's sustainability, right? Because then it's helping other people out of poverty. It can't be indefinite. It has to be a pipeline. But right now, it seems like all of our programs are pretty siloed.
And I think it goes a little bit with your op-ed that ran in the Providence Journal yesterday or recently about kind of making Rhode Island can lead the way. Frank always says this, so I'm going to speak for Frank. Frank always talks about how Rhode Island could be an incubator for a lot of these grand ideas for small businesses, whatever. We're so small and compact that you should be able to try things here, grow things here, and other states should be able to run with them. It sounds like a lot of these ideas, you believe that we're the right size and the right fit for this.
And I believe we have the values for this as well. My concern, and it's interesting. We have a history of being rebels, of challenging the status quo in some respect, and then we have a more contemporary history of cronyism and stagnancy. And so, what I believe is that Rhode Islanders, the working and the marginalized, most of Rhode Island, the 99% of Rhode Island, are in need of programs that aren't just innovative, but again, programs that are creating pipelines of opportunity, pipelines out of poverty. And we talk about revenue. I would be remiss if I did not also acknowledge that if someone is making $500,000 a year and not paying in proportion a fair amount of tax, we should start to talk about that as a supplemental revenue stream that could help these programs be more sustainable over time. And there are going to be certain fights that will take a long time to engage. But as governor, in a programmatic way, by leveraging these federal dollars, we can start to make the case for why these programs are important, how they're successful, and then ultimately build a stronger argument as to equity, fairness, and ultimately justice, and why we should all be doing our part to create a future that's for all generations.
And that opinion piece, for those who want to read it on providencejournal.com, it's on their homepage right now. Rhode Island could be a model for community health system. And I just dropped that in the comments as well for those who want to grab the link. Is healthcare in this big idea the biggest difference between you and the other Democratic candidates for governor?
I don't think it's the biggest idea. I think it's the idea that I'm far ahead for where they are. It's just, I say this with as much care as I can. Most of our elected officials and most of the candidates, all of the candidates on the stage are not from the healthcare arena. Many that have held office have stumbled on decisions. I mentioned this in the op-ed, whether it's having people go out for nomination signatures when COVID's peaking, or putting economists at the forefront of a healthcare crisis, or privatizing public health. Those were significant missteps. There is an economic consequence to that, though. So when we think about small businesses, early on, the governor, when he was lieutenant governor, was talking about $10,000 grants, and that was his big differentiator. Let's get $10,000 grants to businesses. When really we should have been talking to businesses about, well, what is the infrastructure that you'll need? What does infrastructure look like around operations if we're going to have this virus around for 10 years? I mean, that should have been the discussion. And someone who really had a grasp of healthcare and viruses and pandemics may have had, I believe I would have at least engaged commerce in a way where that would have been the end goal, like not only helping them get resources and build money, but ultimately have sustainable infrastructure in the event that we have peaks and troughs in terms of the outbreaks that we're seeing. Beyond that, I mean, education is very important. Growing up in Central Falls, when I go to sleep at night and my daughter Juliet, is trying to keep me up to read her more stories, and I think about what the future looks like for her, and I don't mean to be like melancholy here, but I want our education system in Rhode Island to be so strong that if I weren't on this planet, that I would know that Juliet and that her children and her grandchildren would have a future where the education system is really positioning them for success, even if they don't necessarily do well on standardized tests. Unfortunately, we have an education system now that's built on exceptionalism, and that's overall in the entire country. But in Rhode Island, we haven't done anything to change that. I believe in universal excellence, but that has to be reflected in how we give money to cities. So Providence receives a large amount of money. However, based on the infrastructure needs, it's not enough. Cranston doesn't receive as much. And the problem is that if you look at concentrated poverty, it's on the east side of Cranston, and that's where most of the students are. But because of the affluence on the west side of Cranston, the east side of Cranston gets less, right? So there is this element of having an archaic, even though it's relatively new, but the way it's designed, an archaic education funding formula that segregates our towns and cities, locks people into concentrated poverty, and then ultimately makes it so that our children, at least some of our children, really will never have an opportunity. And that is a concern, and it keeps me up at night when I think about the future for Juliet. And I think it is a differentiator with other candidates who, for the most part, have gone to private schools their entire life.
Let's talk about your campaign. We're going through another campaign during COVID, so I'm sure it's different than your 2018 campaign. How's it going so far, a year out?
Yeah, I think it's going well. I mean, we have a lot of momentum. We are a people-powered campaign, and we have 4 national endorsements, but on the ground, there are, I call them rumblings, but people are very much aware that I am on the ground, that I'm going around the state, that I am really trying to understand not only what the needs of the 5 counties are, but how I can support the efforts taking place now, but also like, how do we think about implementation? What does a free healthcare system look like in Westerly? What does it look like in North Kingstown? What does it look like in Woonsocket? Because we know that there's a lot of cultural nuance in each of those municipalities. And in order to better understand implementation, I am looking at inequities. I am looking at the different disenfranchised and marginalized communities in each of those towns and cities. And what is interesting is that there are, right? I mean, Westerly has a part of Westerly that struggles more than another part of Westerly. Westerly does not have a lot of infrastructure to address homelessness. And so people that struggle with homelessness go over to Connecticut or have to come down to Providence County. Like, what is the interrelationship between the the beautiful things that we're seeing, but also some of the challenges and struggles. And how can I, as governor, help bridge those gaps and support communities in ways that address nuance?
Tell me about your endorsements. It's on your website, but we have a couple minutes, so let's talk about your endorsements and why you believe or why you know that you got them.
Yeah, what's interesting is that the national organizations that have endorsed us went through an interview process, actually validated with community leaders and organizers that have already endorsed us here in Rhode Island, that I've been on the ground doing the work. And so Future Generations was the first. When Future Generations endorsed us, it was founded by a Justice Democrat, Rosa Calderon, and they're looking at progressivism through the lens of who's actually doing the work on the ground, who is focused on building sustainable systems from the ground up that can survive 7 generations based on the indigenous belief system. And what was amazing about that endorsement is the day that endorsement was made, we also had community leaders throughout the state come out and also make an endorsement, and people that have been doing mutual aid work in Providence County, doing work out in Westerly. Since that time, we also have school committee members who have extended their support. David Alden Sears from Cranston School Committee, Jennifer Lima from North Kingstown. And they're doing the equity work. They're challenging systems to understand that we need to teach the truth of history. The other organizations very much align with Future Generations' mission, but certainly have more of a specialization. So Doctors in Politics is recruiting physicians all around the country, especially now during COVID, to ensure that we are building a future where our healthcare system, which is the core of all other kind of social determinants of health, that it's built out in a way to support the working and marginalized. And Catch Fire was founded by multiple leaders throughout the country that have run for Congress or held elected office. And Catch Fire is really focused on taking our stories back. What I'm concerned about in electoral politics in this country and in the state is that the qualifiers, language like viability, terms used, are an attempt to shift the narrative, to change the narrative. We see structures of power appropriating movements of progress, and I've said that before. And what's so important now in this time in history, and it was before COVID, but certainly now, is that we take our story back, that the working and the marginalized take that story back, take control, and really focus on programmatic changes that will benefit us all.
Excellent. Sounds like a very grassroots campaign. Please correct me if I'm wrong there, but when you say, it's powered by people and voters, it sounds like all of the great grassroots campaigns that we've recently heard about and seen. So with that said, how can people learn more about your campaign? How can people get involved? What do you need from voters, Rhode Islanders, right now?
Thank you. So the first thing I need is please tell everyone that Dr. Muñoz is running for governor in the state of Rhode Island. Once you do that, the second step is you can go to our website. It's either governor2022.com or luisdanielmunoz.com. It's Muñoz, but just in case it makes it easier to remember. Also, beyond that, you can volunteer on the website. Please engage with the content. We are the only campaign that has clearly explained not only the vision, but really also the intent and an element of the implementation, right? Because we all know that it has to be different in different places. In addition to that, please donate. We are a grassroots campaign, but in Rhode Island, there's a bit of a setup that takes place here where you do need a certain amount of funds to enter into the mainstream debates, meaning debates by Channel 12 and Channel 10. We don't want that to be the barrier, because I know that being on that stage and focusing on the policies that benefit the working marginalized, we will win this race. And it will likely be a 6-way split race. As of now, it's 5. But with that, really, what that does is it creates a situation where the person with 40,000 votes wins. And I'm not saying that is the best scenario, but what I believe is that if that is going to be the likely outcome, all Rhode Islanders should know what candidates are running, who they are, what they believe, and then ultimately be able to make a decision as to which vision and which leader has the courage to create a better future. So please consider donating. And again, if you'd like to join the team, we are a grassroots campaign. We're around the state. I did announce April, and I don't expect to stop anytime soon. And it's only going to get much more aggressive.
A couple more questions. How do you balance it with work?
Yeah. So, last year I was helping build that contact tracing force and helping deploy vaccination systems. At some point you really have to make a decision. Do you do more consulting? Because you need the flexibility, and the flexibility comes with a little bit of uncertainty. But how else will someone from a working background? How else will we run? Right? We can't continue to accept that electoral politics in this state, I won't even say country because we know what happens in Rhode Island, is should be built off of wealth or just the wealthy. That's what got us here. So it's difficult. More difficult than that, though, is taking time away from Juliet. But also, what I know is in that tension of spending less time with Juliet than I could spend if I was not campaigning, I'm working to help build a better future for her and for other children as well. So as a father, that is the most difficult part of really doing a grassroots campaign, not one where we're just paying for ads, but we're on the ground, connecting.
The current governor has announced that he'd like to see lieutenant governor and governor run as one. We've had another Democratic candidate announce lieutenant governor running with him. Where do you fall on the lieutenant governor specter? Will you be announcing somebody, a teammate, or will you let that happen down the road?
Yeah, I'm not. I think it's an interesting model. I do believe that as an individual, I like to stand firm and let people know clearly where I stand in terms of values and how those values are connected to my lived experience. I understand the strategy of running as a team. I also think it's problematic when 50 plus people are running and then it's not clear what the nuance is, because we all have unique lived experiences. And if that's not reflected in the work that we do, then is there going to be a disconnect at some point? Is there going to, in a representative government, does that create a gap? So from my perspective, I have announced I'm running for governor. No kind of team member running for lieutenant governor. I am hopeful that there will be a lot of great people with a lot of great lived experience fighting the good fight. And if it's towards progress, I'm going to be right alongside them.
There's going to be a lot of noise over the next year. A lot of people saying a lot of things, making a lot of noise, trying to drown out the whole pool here. One more time, what do you want people to remember? Why should people keep you in mind and keep following and support you?
Yeah, thank you. It really does come down to lived experience. I mean, isn't it time that the working and the marginalized in this state have someone who's fighting for them, not someone who is ultimately reflective of the same power structures, temporarily appropriating movements of progress, temporarily saying that they're going to do the right thing, only to lean back on cronyism, elitism, and classism. Isn't it time to have someone who's fighting? And so my hope is that everyone's remembers that I am the physician in the race, raised in Central Falls, part of the working community, focused on creating programmatic changes that are sustainable for the next 7 generations. And with the federal dollars, now is the time to have the courage to do that. And if we don't do it now, if we don't create resilient communities now, what does the future look like for any of our families? So please know that Dr. Muñoz is fighting for you. And if you would like to stand beside me, I'd be honored to have you.
Excellent. And I'm running the website for more information right on the bottom. What did we miss today? We could talk for hours, obviously, but did we miss anything big that we didn't get to?
Well, there's a lot on the website, so please look at it. In terms of certainly in terms of reproductive health, I believe in the autonomy and agency that women have over their bodies. I also think that we should look at comprehensive reproductive health education in our school systems. In terms of affordable housing, I think we should really understand that there's affordable housing and low-income housing, and how do we really approach that in a way that's environmentally friendly, while also addressing the fact that we have environmental conditions that contribute to a lot of healthcare issues, especially within children. And so I think these challenges or these areas are complex, but they're all connected. And on the website, my attempt is to bridge those connections. So please look at the website. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer it. And then you can always look at Twitter and look at the Twitter storms that take place. But we're in the fight. I'm in the fight for you. So looking forward to hearing from you.
Excellent. You can read more about healthcare, opportunity, environment, housing, women's rights, education, immigration, much more. Lots to read on there. And I'll give you a kudos and best website I've seen so far. So
Thank you,
way to go. And we'll be doing this often. So we will certainly catch up with you as this journey continues. And please keep us in mind as you have news and want to reach some of our lovely viewers and watchers down here in South County as well as in Newport County.
I'd love that. Absolutely.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
All right. That's going to do it for us today. If you missed this video, you can catch it on WhatsUpNewp.com. It will be there immediately afterward. You can share it with your friends, family, supporters, anybody else in Rhode Island who might be interested. And you can follow along all of our live videos there on WhatsUpNewp.com. Thanks for watching.